When you think of huge college football states, there are a couple that come to mind. Texas is one of the biggest states in the country and is home to the most D1 football programs, or you might also think about Florida and Georgia, who are also two of the biggest states for football recruiting as well. You then have schools like California and Ohio that really love college and pro football, but you probably don't think about the state of Montana, but there's a lot of good football that is played in that state. There's a lot of reasons why people might not think that much of Montana, as it's the fourth largest state in terms of land area, but it is the 8th least populated state. There aren't any pro teams anywhere near Montana, unless you count the Seattle Seahawks or Denver Broncos, and both of them are at least 2 states away. Montana hasn't even seen a team play at a high level of college football since the NCAA split into 1A and 1AA. That was over 50 years ago, but Montana has been a super underrated state for football all throughout its history, and a lot of it comes down to the 2 biggest teams that call the state home, and that's Montana and Montana State. The Grizzlies and Bobcats are 2 of the best programs in the FCS right now, and they would definitely be decent schools in the FBS if they ended up going there. They are also host to one of the biggest rivalries in all of college football, and honestly the most underrated one, and it's called the Brawl of the Wild. That matchup will be taking place this weekend, and I thought today would be the perfect time to highlight this rivalry, talk about football as a whole in the state, and do something interesting for once. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's go ahead and get started and talk about the state of Montana and their unique football history. Before we talk about those 2 schools though, we need to talk about some of the other schools in the state, and I want to start by talking about Montana Tech. Instead of being a part of the NCAA, Montana Tech is part of the Frontier Conference of the NAIA, which is about equivalent to the D2 or D3 level. They first started playing football in 1902 and have one of the weirdest histories in all of college sports. The biggest reason as to why they're one of the most interesting schools in college sports comes down to their nickname. As you can probably guess, Montana Tech is a technical school, and Montana as a state does a lot of mining. They chose the nickname of Ore Diggers for their school, but in 1986, they hired a head coach that became a little bit of an internet celebrity, and his name was Bob Green. Coach Green led the team all the way through the 2010 season before finally retiring. He went 140 and 116 all time with the Ore Diggers and took them to a national title game in 1996. His internet videos became popular since they were usually halftime or post-game interviews of him saying things like, quote, "We gotta be like a woodpecker in a petrified forest. Just keep busy and look for opportunities." Alongside Mike Leach, he's probably one of the most unique coaches in college football history just because he wasn't afraid to be himself and be goofy while being a good football coach as well. There are 7 other universities in the state of Montana, but other than the Grizzlies, Bobcats, and Ore Diggers, only Montana Western, Carroll College, Montana State Northern, and Rocky Mountain College play college football. They are all NAIA schools and are all members of the Frontier Conference. They have football members in Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota, as well as California, Oregon, Arizona, and Idaho. But far and away, the best 2 schools in the state when it comes to football are Montana and Montana State. Let's start with the flagship university in the state, and that is of course the University of Montana Grizzlies. They first started playing football in 1897, and their only win was against Montana State, which ended up starting their rivalry, which we'll talk about later. They didn't join a conference until 1902, when they joined the Northwest Intercollegiate Athletics Association and created one of the weirdest conferences in college sports history. The NWIAA ended up becoming one of the precursors to the Pac-12, and Montana's first conference mates were Oregon, Oregon State, Washington, Washington State, Idaho, and a small school named Whitman College, which was in Walla Walla, Washington. Montana would struggle in that conference though, and would later join those same teams from before in the Pacific Coast Conference in 1924, which had added Cal and Stanford. They were then joined by Utah in 1928, and then UCLA joined. One of the funnier things about college sports history is that since Montana joined the PCC first, UCLA actually had to change their name from the Grizzlies to the Bruins. If Montana had never been in that conference, UCLA would probably be the Grizzlies today. It's kind of funny to think that a power conference school was forced to change their name because an FCS team already had it first. But the Pacific Coast Conference was pretty much always getting pushed and shoved in different directions, and between the calls to emphasize academics over sports and the scandals that some of the teams were getting in, Montana would decide to leave the conference in 1951 and join the Mountain States Conference, which is also known as the Skyline Conference and was the precursor to the Big Sky and the WAC. In 1962, though, that conference dissolved, and Montana joined Montana State, Weber State, Idaho, Idaho State, and Gonzaga to create the Big Sky Conference in 1963. Throughout the 70s, they would continue to be a middling program until they signed Don Reed from Portland State to lead their team in 1986. Over a 10-year span from 1986 to 1996, Montana would go 85-36 and go undefeated against their rival Montana State and would win the team's first ever national championship in 1995. By this point, Montana was one of the better and more consistent schools in Division I AA, and the team was supposed to continue to be good when Reed retired, and it would happen. They would win a national championship in his first season as their head coach, but he lost it to Marshall. His tenure at Montana was also very successful, as he went undefeated in 4 games against Montana State and went 39-12 as the head coach before taking the head coaching job at Utah State in 1999. To replace him, Montana hired Northern Colorado head coach Joe Glenn, who would go 2-1 against Montana State and 39-6 as a head coach, and he would win a national championship before taking the head coaching job at Wyoming all the way back in 2002. So by this point in 2003, Montana had won 2 national titles in the last 10 years and was one of the most successful programs in the FCS, but they chose to stay here instead of moving up to the WAC or the Mountain West. In 2003, they hired Bobby Hauck to be their head coach, and he would go 80-17 as their head coach from 2003 to 2009. The problem was Montana State was starting to catch up to Montana, and the Grizz went 4-2 against them. Bobby would take the Grizz to 3 FCS national title games, but lost each one. In 2010, he accepted the head coaching job at UNLV, and Montana was starting to come back down to earth. Their next head coach was Robin Pflugrad, who went 13-7 and 1-1 against Montana State in 2 years, but he got mixed up in some bad things and was fired for cause from the university, so they replaced him with Mick Delaney, who coached from 2012 to 2014 and went 24-14. After his campaign ended, Montana went with Bob Stitt, who was 21-14 before he became an offensive assistant at Oklahoma State. To replace Coach Stitt, Montana brought back Bobby Hauck in 2018, who had been fired from UNLV and had spent the last 3 years as the special teams coordinator with San Diego State. Under his leadership, Montana returned to being one of the best teams in the Big Sky, winning the conference title in 2023 and making it back to the national title game. So far this season, his Grizzlies are 10-0 and undefeated and are looking at making another run towards a national title game. On the other side of the brawl is Montana State. The Bobcats first started playing football in 1897, but started as a very small college. While Montana was playing against Oregon and UCLA, Montana State was an NAIA school. But they would reach the top of their competition level faster than Montana did. Montana State was an independent at a small college division until 1916, when they joined the Rocky Mountain Athletics Conference. They went from independent to NAIA in 1952. While members of the RMAC, the Bobcats won the national title in 1956, and not only was it their first, but it was also the first national title given out at the NAIA level. That year, though, the Bobcats moved from NAIA to the NCAA, where they played as an independent until 1963. They were one of the best independent teams during that time frame and didn't have a losing season from 1957 to 1962. But in 1963, they joined up with Montana, which would later become the FCS, and were charter members of the Big Sky Conference. From there, they won their second national title, this time at the D2 level in 1976. When the Big Sky moved from D2 to Division I AA, they won their first ever FCS title in 1984, which so far is the last national title they have won. They started out smaller than Montana, but put together a winning program and winning tradition faster than the Grizzlies did. In fact, Montana State claims 21 total conference titles compared to Montana's 19. So these are 2 of the best college football teams in their division, so what makes the Brawl of the Wild so special? Well, for starters, both schools are in a very different part of the state, so there's definitely a lot of regionalism going on. They're on either side of the Continental Divide, so in a lot of ways, there is a physical barrier between the 2 teams despite being in the same state, which creates an us versus them type relationship. And they play for one of the biggest trophies in college football, which is better known as the Great Divide Trophy. But there's also a cultural divide between the 2 teams. Montana State is the bigger school in terms of students, but since Montana is the state school and Montana State is a land-grant school, there's a ton of us versus them that happens in general, and it goes deep off the field. Montana is considered the more academic of the 2 schools, and Montana State is considered the more blue-collar, so there are also some class backgrounds to it as well. It's one of the oldest rivalries in college sports, placing as the 31st oldest rivalry in the NCAA, and a lot of the times, they're two of the best teams in the Big Sky, so that game has determined who goes to the playoffs and who ends their season. There have also been some really high emotional patches during the rivalry, as Montana won 16 straight games, which fans refer to as the streak. Montana dominated the rivalry all the way up until 1955, when Montana State started to dominate, and then the tables turned again in 1986, and then in 2010. Over the last 15 years, Montana State leads the series with an 8-5 record, but all time, the Grizzlies have the lead with a 74, 43-5 record. This year's game is unbelievable, as Montana is undefeated at 11-0, and Montana State is currently 9-2 with losses to Oregon and South Dakota State. The Grizzlies are led by star quarterback Keali Ayat and Eli Gilman at running back, and on the other side of the football, Montana State is led by former Stanford transfer Justin Lamson, and they replaced one of the best quarterbacks in school history, Tommy Mellott, who was drafted in the 6th round. These are two of the top teams in the FCS, and it should be a huge game, and apparently it's the most expensive ticket on the marketplace right now. We'll see how the game plays out, but I hope you guys enjoyed today's video about the unique history of football in the state of Montana. I thought it was pretty cool, and I've always enjoyed this game, and hope you guys do as well. But what do you guys think? If you're a fan of one of these schools, what did I get right and wrong? How big is this rivalry? And what state should I cover next? Be sure to let me know down below, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out one of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.